Welcome back. Now in this video we'll tell you about the necessary documents for audit activities and how to fill them. Let's begin. First of all, these three documents are used in all audits, regardless of type. First, the opening and closing meeting agenda. Write the name of the organization and the audit ID. Then, the opening and closing meeting attendance, where you must write the organization's name, auditor, site, and ID. If there were any NCRs, make sure to tick the appropriate boxes. You must notify the client of the deadline to respond their NCRs. Then, the names of those who attended the meetings must appear. In the non-conformity log, write the information that is requested. Contemplate the acceptance and closing dates established in the audit report and/or procedures. Likewise, the transmittals will be the same for all audit types. These transmittals were generated when you registered the activities on BMS. The one on the left is for the client and the one on the right is for the auditor. The system will give them to you with all the necessary information, so you don't have to fill them. All you need to do is send them to the client and the auditor respectively and ask them to sign it and send it back to you. It is very important they sign them before the audit date, since it is a confirmation of the agreement. First off, let's talk about these documents for Stage 1 or S1. This is the set of documents that you must upload to Intact. Notice how the documents were named. ORJ means Orion Register Japan. And next you can see the abbreviation for your client, Hogwarts in this case. Then the name of the format. In this example, the client will certify their ISO 9001 and ISO 14001 integrated system. Next, let's move on to a very important document, the audit report for Stage 1. The auditor must fill this report, but it is your responsibility to double-check it to make sure everything is correct. On the top, write the company's name. Be very careful here, as the name must be the same in all the documents. Do not use abbreviations or any other modification. Write the audit ID and date. Then, place the number of areas of concern found in the red text. Then, the opportunities for improvements, strengths, and additional comments. The opportunities for improvement must not be written as non-conformities or offer consulting services. For the conclusion, the auditor needs to tick the box only. Write the auditor's name and the date, which must be the same as the last audit day. The Orion Technical Review section must be left blank. In the second page, there must be the members of the audit team. Also, make sure to fill the information for the next audit activity. Now, in these pages, the most important aspects are the standard, the scope, and the sub-processes. Verify that they're correct. Also ensure that the sub-processes coincide with those in the marketing documents we saw in the last video. Non-applicable items have to be left blank. If there were any changes during the opening or closing meetings, they will be included in the upper box. If a process was not audited, it will be shown in the lower box. If no changes were made, write none. In this part, verify that the information is correctly filled in the corresponding spaces. The ones marked with arrows are compulsory. Here's an example of the audit program section properly filled. Pay attention to the sub-processes, as they must be the same as the ones that were mentioned before in this report. The audit program includes the whole certification cycle. In Stage 2 and recertification, all the processes will be audited. For surveillance audits, only parts of the processes will be audited. It is the auditor who will determine which processes will be audited during the surveillances. However, the management review and the use of logos have to be audited every single time, no exceptions. If there are any temporary sites, they have to be included here. To finish the audit report for Stage 1, fill all the unsolved items if there are any. Then, the organization's name, audit dates, and ID. In the distribution section, write the organization name, the team leader, and other auditors that participated in the activities. Next, we have another document, the Stage 1 Audit Plan and Schedule. Just verify that the auditor filled everything correctly, and if any information is missing, write it in. An audit day equals 8 hours of auditing activities. Lunchtime is not included in these 8 hours. Contemplate the closing and opening meeting times. Together, they must not exceed 45 minutes. Now, the focus sheet. Notice that when you use a technical expert, you must fill the first section. Select the periodicity for the surveillance audits. Then, write the scope, which is critical to this document. In the green rectangle, put the client's preferred date for the next audit. Then, the product or service processes audited. I know we've talked about them too many times, but the documents keep asking for them, so make sure to fill them in. Now we look at the footprint. This is an easy one. There are two cases. The first is when the client has a quality manual. In that case, just write which section of the manual contains the requirements for the standard. See the first table, clause 4. The second table is when they don't have any quality manual. Then they must write which document or documents meet the standard's requirements. Look at clause 6 for an example. As of right now, there are only footprints for 9001 and 14001, which are the ones we're using as an example. If both standards are being audited, fill each footprint. Those are the required documents for Stage 1. These are the documents for Stage 2. The documents in the green rectangles are filled the same way we've already explained, so we'll skip those. Now here is the executive summary of audit results, the most important document for Stage 2. First, the auditor must write the number of NCRs, both minor and major. Use numbers, not letters. Then, the status of previous non-conformances. Since this is a Stage 2, there are no previous NCRs. In the case of surveillance audits and recertifications, you should write down the previous non-conformities, but only if they are still open. The chart below is a guideline to know what the deadline is to address the non-conformities, depending on the audit type and the standard. Next, fill the opportunities for improvement, strengths, and comments if applicable. In the conclusion, determine the proper choice. Then, write the team leader's name and the team members. Finally, write the type, the dates, and the focus for the next audit. This section must match the audit program plan. Now let's move on to the audit details. You have to fill the site information and the configuration information. If there are no changes, write none. Once again, write the standards, exclusions, and their justifications, scope, etc. the same way we saw for Stage 1. In the additional specific information, put the appropriate aspects and objectives, depending on the standard. These must be the same as the ones you put in the marketing documents. In this part, you have to determine the effectiveness of the processes. The auditor will give two scores. The y-axis for the identification and documentation of requirements, and the x-axis for the effectiveness of implementation. Now, simplify the coordinate that corresponds to both scores. If the resulting letter has a triangle next to it, the client will most surely get an NCR. If it has a circle, there is a possibility they'll get one. If it has no symbol next to it, then they won't get an NCR. This method is used to determine the effectiveness of the overall process, but it's the same technique used to grade individual processes. After determining the letter, write it in the box below, in the green rectangle. Here are the individual processes that are audited. In the green rectangle, you will write the effectiveness level for the management review, the internal audit process, and the overall management process. If there are any NCRs within this process, write the number of the nonconformity. For instance, if within this process the auditor found 2 NCRs, which have numbers 10 and 11, they must write 10 and 11, not 2. In the blue rectangle, write the evidence obtained, interviews, observations, and documentation. For observations, is practically a summary of what they reviewed, and for documentation include only the names of the documents that were reviewed, with revision. For our examples, Hogwarts excluded the design from their system. In this case, just write NA, non-applicable. Repeat these steps for the rest of the processes, listed on the right side. Don't forget to write the key processes or operations or processes in the green rectangle. In the Other section, the space is normally used to list calibration issues. Write calibration and the pertinent information. Remember the audit program that we saw for stage 1? You must respect it for stage 2. That means it has to have the same information. If it's a surveillance that you are doing, you must make it then and respect it until the next recertification. Consider that the operations of processes must still be the same. Let's continue to the report for stage 2, which ends the same way as stage 1. So just follow the same steps that we already told you before. The audit plan and schedule is pretty simple. Just fill in the appropriate information. Now, it's time to look at the schedule. Here you must plan the audit days and times. Remember, the opening and closing meeting should not last more than 45 minutes total. The schedule must specify which processes will be reviewed in which day, and for which standard if there is more than one. To make this schedule, you must use the next reference. Here it is, attachment 4, which was mentioned in the audit program. This will help you determine which clauses will be audited for each process. There is a version for each standard. So since this is an audit for 9 and 14, we'll only use the attachments for 9 and 14. Let's move on to the focus sheet. Just fill the information. This one is pretty simple too. Normally it is used to notify about changes in the management system. In the last page of the focus sheet, include the processes that will be audited during the next audit. Again, it has to match the audit program. Now, the audit program plan. First, write the name and address of the company. Then the standards and codes to be audited, as well as the aspects, objectives, etc. Once again, remember they must match the other documents. Same goes for the key processes. Then select the applicable PAWs. In the last part of the audit program, just write which processes were audited and which ones will be audited next time. Now we're done with stage 2. Nicely done. Let's move on to the compulsory documents for surveillances and surveillance upgrades. We've already explained all of them except for the ones in the green rectangle, so we'll only be talking about those. There must be a footprint and upgrade checklist for each of the standards that will be upgraded. Now here, this must be filled before the audit takes place by the client. The most important part is signaled with an arrow. Make sure that it's properly filled. The upgrade checklist. Just describe the evidence, method, or any way in which the client complies with the clauses. Remember to fill as many of these as the standards that will be upgraded. So, if you are upgrading 3 standards, fill 3 of these, for example. The process for recertification and recertification upgrades is the same. Keep in mind that for recertification, all processes will be audited. Those are all the types of audits that we perform. Now let's talk about the non-conformity reports, a very important part of every audit. The NCRs must be included in all the audit types we've previously seen. Each non-conformity should have its own report, that is, the auditor must write as many NCRs as there are non-conformities, one for each. Write the organization's name and audit ID, the site, the NCR number, whether it's a major or minor non-conformity, the standard and clause number and specific subclause, then the text from the clause and the writing of the non-conformity. Don't forget to write the due date for the completed corrections, the auditor's name, issue dates, that it must be the final day of the audit, and finally the management name. All of step 2 must be answered by the client. The auditor must ensure that all questions in the correction plan are answered properly. Look at the instructions in red for the root cause section. All questions must be answered by the client. The aim of this section is to find the root cause of the nonconformity. The ideal would be to answer no, so that the auditor can identify the causes. At the end, write the name of who sent the information, generally the management representative, and the date when the response was sent. Step 3 must be filled by the auditor. They must write the date of the correction plan, the causes, and the corrective action plan, the date in which they were accepted. These dates must be the same in the nonconformity log. For major nonconformities, fill in the green rectangle. Now in step 4, here is the closure of nonconformities. For minor nonconformities, this step must be verified in the next audit. For major nonconformities, remember, clients only have 120 days to close them. In the first box, write the summary of the evidence reviewed for the correction. In the next one, the summary of the evidence for the corrective action and closure. Don't forget to write the auditor's name and date of verification. This date has to correspond with the one in the nonconformity log. Now this is the final part of the process. Create a folder for each audit type in your own computer and then make a zip file with all these folders. Then access Citrix. As we did before, drag the zip file to the drag drop icon. Select Attribute Now, and in the type of document, select Audit Report. Then write the full activity ID and click Retrieve. Like in the other occasions, this should give you the rest of the information. Finally, click Save. Congratulations, you made it through this long video. We covered most of the important information, but it is what you need to upload these audit documents onto Citrix. Thank you. See you later.